Five Nights at Freddy's took over YouTube and the gaming community back in 2014, Markiplier's initial gameplay of it reaching nearly 90 million views, PewDiePie's reaching 16 million, Jacksepticeye's reaching 13 million, and Game Theory's first ever theory reaching over 25 million. The unique mechanics, creepy atmosphere, frightening jump scares, and general originality made it appeal to millions and millions, making Freddy Fazbear and Gang a new household name. The release of the second game only made it bigger. Five Nights at Freddy's 2 brought back everything that was loved from the original and improved upon it. More characters, more jump scares, more mechanics, and more lore. The massive success of the first two games made this brand new series one of the biggest of its time. However, the Five Nights at Freddy's series isn't nearly as popular today. Some may say that's just because the first game is now over 6 years old. But more and more games have been released over the years, and the series still has a dedicated fan base. Plus, there are several games that managed to keep the popularity rolling throughout their lifespan. Why did the FNAF series' popularity disappear? The hope of the series never went away. Games kept being released, the book series has been very consistent, and we've had more updates on the FNAF movie lately than ever before. So again, what made the millions of people that tuned in at the beginning tune out? I think that the answer that makes most sense is Five Nights at Freddy's 3. Five Nights at Freddy's 1 was so insanely popular that Scott Cawthon, the developer, made sure that the second game was perfect. The introduction of mini-games and the development of the story enhanced people's focus on the series. So when the teaser trailer for Five Nights at Freddy's 3 released, the internet exploded. The third Five Nights at Freddy's may have been the most anticipated indie game of the decade. Everyone wanted to see who this new character was, and what questions the game was going to answer, and how the story would continue to develop. And when the game was released, the popularity of the series did continue. Every YouTuber started playing the game, plenty of people bought the game and started playing, and the community continued to theorize what was going on in the game's plot. But by the end of the game's hype, the community had unanimously agreed that this was the worst game to come out of the series, and this game could never compare to the first two. Five Nights at Freddy's 3, in my opinion, is still a work of art in a lot of ways, but there are just so many problems with it. The game isn't nearly as scary as the first two. The gameplay is so much less engaging and way more uninteresting. The atmosphere is far from appealing, and honestly, it just looks kind of poor. The characters aside from Springtrap kind of looked gross and just straight up bad. And what you may have forgotten is that this was going to be the last game in the series. This was before Scott had fully fleshed out the story. This was the whole story. So the worst game being the ending was disappointing in a way. Scott ended up making Five Nights at Freddy's 4 to further develop the story and make a game that was infinitely scarier than the prior ones. But I believe that because Five Nights at Freddy's 3 was portrayed as being the ending, it made some people just simply move on. As well as that, I think a lot of people lost interest after Five Nights at Freddy's 3 because it was the most uninteresting. I still like Five Nights at Freddy's 3 in, a lot of ways. I still think that the complexity of the mini-games towards the end of the game is absolutely phenomenal, and it's really frustrating, but it's still a really well put together piece of work. And I still don't mind the gameplay a lot of the time. As the nights progress, it does get more challenging, and it's still very easy to exploit, and it's still not the most engaging, but it's not a bad game by any means. But the fact that it had all of this hype behind it is what made it flop so heavy. The Five Nights at Freddy's series is far from dead. People are patiently waiting for Security Breach to come out, people are still reading the books, and the community is still massive. But outside of the dedicated community, no one really cares. Nobody looks at this series like it's a work of art. Nobody thinks of Five Nights at Freddy's as this ever so important franchise. But if you break it down, it really is. Games never tell their story in a way that is this phenomenal. And no game had the mechanics and gameplay of the first Five Nights at Freddy's until that game blew up. Also, so many horror games struggle to maintain the fear of the player through atmosphere and sounds. A lot of the time the game heavily relies on the jump scare and nothing else, but Five Nights at Freddy's, especially the original, has great atmosphere, amazing character models, and the gaming heavily affects the fear that comes from the game. If you are not a Five Nights at Freddy's fan, that is perfectly okay. Nevertheless, I think there's a difference between liking something and respecting something. I believe that Scott Cawthon and Five Nights at Freddy's deserves all the respect in the world. But this is why I believe that Five Nights at Freddy's lost its popularity.